Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out in this slightly less clement weather than we've become used to lately in spring. I'm Sophie Lieberman and I'm the Director of Public Education and Industry Programs here at ACMI, the National Museum of Film, Television, Video Games, Art and Digital Culture. As we begin this evening, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and of course to extend that respect to other peoples from other nations who may be joining us this evening. My job is really short and sweet. I want to thank you for joining us, and also particularly to thank Tony Briggs and Damien Pradier of Typecast Pictures for working in partnership with ACMI to pull this session together. At the end of our last conversation that we worked on together, Damien mentioned that she and Tony were eager to do something to recognise the significant role of Aboriginal women in developing contemporary screen culture, and I'm thrilled that this is where we've landed. So thank you, Damien and Tony, for your continued partnership, and thanks in advance to our wonderful panel this evening. I'm now going to hand you over to our fabulous chair for this evening, Leila Guruwiwi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. First and foremost, my name is Laurel Rudialpi Mindali Guruwiwi, but most people know me as Leila Guruwiwi from the Margaret Footy Show, but tonight I will be chairing the discussion tonight, which I'm extremely privileged to, and thank you both to Damien and Tony for allowing me to do it again. And before I go any further, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are on and the land that I've been able to live and thrive on, the Wathaurong and Burrong people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and all other Indigenous people that are here in this space today. So yesterday was actually the 20th anniversary since Rachel Perkins' directorial debut of Radiance was released. So I feel like this was the perfect timing for a conversation about this, which is, of course, the Trailblazing Indigenous Women of Screen. And we have some wonderful people here on the panel tonight, and I will be introducing all of them. So first up, we have actor, musician and potter, Uncle Jack Charles.
I'm no woman. But, I wish I'd have worn my caftan, actually. It would have been better if I had my caftan on. But, no, sorry.
Next up, we have Helpman-nominated actor, writer and singer, Elaine Crombie. Yes. And last but not least, the producer and founder of Window Film Festival, Pauline Clegg. So a big round of applause for all of our panellists, and thank you all for being here tonight and being a part of this conversation, which I think is a really important conversation to have, and especially on such an amazing anniversary as well. So first up, we're going to have a little clip of Rosalie Kunoth-Monks from Jeddah.
Hello, Joe. Hello, boss. Nice pile of hides you got drying there. You must have been giving those buffaloes a peppering.
It was a fair shoot, boss. The dry weather scabbed them about a bit.
Yes.
Your tent's ready?
Good, thanks, Joe.
I'll go and give Jeddah a hand. Come on, Lubra. I'll give you a hand.
Thank you, Stockman. You're a properly useful fellow.
You don't even know how to handle a swag properly. Where do we put Jeddah, Mrs. McMahon?
Anywhere close to the tent will do, Joe.
Better camp here. I don't want the crocodiles to eat you.
No crocodile will eat me.
I don't know. You're a nice piece of chocolate.
You know what, Joe? I think you're going to be a very bad old man.
Bad enough for you, Jeddah?
Maybe.
Lovely.
So this question is to Elaine and Pauline. How did this clip make you feel as an Aboriginal woman?
Oh. Where to start? She had the whitest teeth.
That's true.
Who was the guy?
Chips Rafferty. Painted up, wasn't it?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
He plays the half caste that's painted up.
is he?
And then Marbach is the dark guy,
Yeah.
who's Robert Tarawali.
Robert Tarawali.
And then Rosalie Kenneth Monks is Jeddah.
Yeah, right. I don't know.
Maybe I should start.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
chose that clip when I was talking to Damien and Tony, predominantly because it sort of kind of quintessentially shaped the face of an Aboriginal woman for screen for the next 30 years. You know, I know Auntie Rosalie dislikes people talking about her in that film, but I think it's important to remember what it sort of there's this it's really weird that at the start of that film there's this beautiful bit about Aboriginal women working, being a part of the stock, sort of kind of, you know, you see all this collecting of lily pillies and all that kind of stuff, and then Jeddah comes along and she's the warm prop that sort of kind of doesn't really have a voice. She gets talked about constantly as an object, as a
little bit of chocolate.
little bit of chocolate, the little lubra, which I just sort of like go, oh my God, who allowed someone to say that to an Aboriginal woman at that time? But it quintessentially started a shape of creating, I suppose, what I consider the warm prop of an Aboriginal woman stereotype for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
And you probably, as actors, you'd probably have a different point of view, but...
Yeah, I don't...
Well,
Yeah, no, you go. 'Cause I'm still,
yeah.
still forming in a...
I met Rosie Monks when she was a nun after this movie. I was wandering around over in the government grounds over there, in the park over there near government, you know, the government building there, government house, and it was pissing down rain. And so I made a beeline for one of those things that, little round things where you can duck in and, be protected from the rain, one of those things. And also running towards it was this nun and this young girl. And so we were soaking wet by the time we reached there. And I looked at her because I'd seen Jeddah. And I recognised Rosie. And I didn't say, I said, hello, sister, how are you? And that's all I said, But I secretly knew that this was that woman from Jeddah and that. But I was with the early days of the ABC in those days too. And they tried desperately, by the way, to write more pieces for the fellow, what's his name?
Robert Tarawali.
Robert Tarawali, but he had problems with English. So the playwrights and the writers down at the ABC were at their wits' end to develop anything constructive. But who knows where it could have been if he'd had if he'd had master of the language, and in the sense of performance and that, But it's strange that I saw Rosie Monks when she was a nun.
Yeah.
And I haven't told her that. I should say, I saw you when you was a nun. Remember me? Because I had beautiful big afro then.
And what do you think the impact, positive or negative, would have been for Aboriginal women and the way that they perceived themselves at that particular time when this movie came out?
I think it would have just been about representation, seeing, however it was, just seeing themselves represented. I've not seen Jeddah. I'm really.
And after watching that clip, will you watch it?
Well, Yes, I probably will. Just to not be.
It's worth the watch.
Yeah.
It's worth the watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose it's the same. It's the same as what it is now. You know, it's just about representation. However, that was things have changed now, so that would not.
And you think about it. It was shot in 1955. I mean, Chevelle, you know, found them two Aboriginal leading roles. I mean, that was phenomenal, and for the first time in colour. If you think about that, not just coloured people on screen, but Jeddah is Australia's first Technicolor film.
Yeah.
Good trivia point for all those people out there. And so it created this like, you know, it went to Cannes and it got a huge following from that. And so it created such a phenomenon, I think, in a lot of ways, in terms of what people thought Aboriginal culture was, that someone like, in one way it started talking about the stolen generation at a time when no one was ready to talk about it. Jeddah was a part of the stolen generation without them recognising that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I want to make the remake and own the option to that, is because it's important to be able to look at these old films and go, you know, like, what is it about her that we don't really know about? You know, like, we didn't understand that she's a part of that stolen generation, and then that whole issue about a promised marriage. Most people didn't understand what that was. So when Marbach come along, he was this sort of kind of mystical being that was just hunting after her, when in actual fact he was promised to her from, well, they were promised to each other from their birth. And so that traditional background wasn't understood by the director at that time, and so it was made sexual rather than being something that was a traditional component, you know?
Yep. And next we have a quote from Annie Justine Saunders. There it is. I often felt like a warm prop, and that's exactly what you just said before, Pauline. I have been raped, plundered and pillaged more than I would like to be known for. And then Indigenous people became part of the storytelling. Our roles started to change. We started getting a voice on screen. And in your opinion, as black artists, how do you think that this change, how do you think it's changed since this particular quote that Annie Justine has said?
She was just, from my perspective of watching Justine at work, in her first big role was with the Ben Hall series as my missus in it, and that, and she was just fantastic to work with. She was a model in Queensland, you know, modelled, and she looked so beautiful and that, you know. And this was the way Hollywood treated Don Chaffee from Hollywood, English director. And he wanted us to black up on the screen test at the de Havilland Valley, where they built a mining town over there outside Sydney. And it was a hot day. And so I was bare-breasted along with her and that. And she gets shot by Frank Gardner's gang accidentally. And I'm supposed to pick her up and take her around to the front of the hut and tell Ben, look what they've done, Ben. They shot me missus. I'm off after Frank Gardner. I'm going to get him and that, you know. So I joined the native police force to get him and that, you know. And she was too heavy to carry. It was grease makeup. It was grease makeup, and this is true. I attempted to pick her up. You know, I'm only 7.5 ringing wet in those days, you know. And so I was picking up Justine and struggling, and the hot day and the grease was slipping and sliding. And true, her left tit landed in my right eye. And that. You can't fuzz that, you know. But it happened. And we all had a good old giggle and a laugh. And she was very embarrassed and that, you know. So she determined that shot. She said, put a mat under my bum. We never knew the word mum in those days, but we knew bum. Put a mat under my bum, and Jack dragged me out to the front by my arm and said, "Look what they've done, Ben. I'm going to get," all that, So she was the first person that actually determined a shot here in the annals of the screen and Indigenous women. She was very strong. And years later, she comes up to me and said, "Jack, I've just had an offer of doing a movie called Croc." "Oh, Croc? What want you to wrestle a crocodile or what, I said, "No, Jack, they want me tied to a stake outside, next to a billabong to be sacrificed to the big croc."
Oh my God.
So I said, "You knocked it back." "But of course, Jack, I wouldn't do." But they were the kind of roles, and we had to black up too. People weren't comfortable with half-caste people, playing. And in those days, there would have been half-caste people around. But the mindset of movie makers was, no, if they're Aboriginal, got to be black. So I always objected to being blacked up, especially as Billy Dargan in that, in the Ben Hall series and that. So by the end of the series, I refused to go to makeup. And at the last series, just pure complexion and that, not makeup on. But yes, so she was one of the strongest people, that give a wake-up call, if you will, to producers and also to directors. That's a strong force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. I think it's like nowadays it's about, producers and directors and production companies like doing their homework earnestly, like go out and do your homework in regards to representation and the fact that not everybody looks like me or my skin. We're all like, look up here, we're all different shades, and it's not about cast, like they have to, especially like casting agencies, like they just have to get that we want an authentic look, like they have to get that out of their mouths. It just has to be, it just is not respectful anymore to do that, I don't think. Like it's kind of, it's a bit, because we all go to, we all go to our acting, we do our, pay our due diligence, whatever that word is. Yes. We do all of that, and kids would go through schools and stuff like that and still get knocked, like go to castings and still get knocked back because they don't look like a full blood, or but that's all.
Or they've been told to black up and they refuse to do it. Yes.
Being blackened up was ridiculous. Yeah.
The other thing that happened a lot during that period so that quote comes from, I filmed Dani Justine the last 5 years before she passed, and I'm still trying to finish that documentary, but we'll get there. But one of the things that was very clear about the precipice of that sort of era was when people like, when they banded together and stuff like Black Theatre started. And the work that people like her and Uncle Bob, Mazza and that did on places like Fringe Dwellers. I remember she gave me for my 35th birthday, she gave me a page of the opening scene of Fringe Dwellers, which had her and Uncle Bob's rewriting, these actors rewriting the whole script. And she gave me the first 5 pages to say, this is what, as a producer, you cannot let us do anymore. We have to act. It's our skill is acting. And you've got to find the writers and the directors to help.
When was that?
So, you're going to make me give away my own.
No, but that conversation. So
you
when
almost
she,
had
when
the
she,
same conversation probably.
When she would have gave that to you, that would have been the conversation that her and Uncle Bob were probably having while they were doing it.
Yeah.
And how long ago was that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's still a conversation that has to change as well.
Yeah.
About making actors also cultural consultants and all that kind of.
Or paying them.
Yeah.
For that role.
Oh yeah. Slap on another $2,000 because that's what it costs to do your homework. I reckon.
And she organised the, along with Foley and the Bostocks, the First National Playwrights Conference up there in the National Territory up there, Canberra, and that. A funny little story there. Foley said, "You should go to this, Jack. Look, I'll give you $500 a week if you didn't do any bergs and you kept yourself available to go up and we drive you up to Canberra." And so, believe it or not, for a fortnight I didn't do any bergs. I wanted to do this First National Black Playwrights Conference, and there was the beautiful Justine.
But do you think...
Just a little story there, but yeah. But she's been present and she's been a great influence in pricking my conscience because of the value that she had given to us in the industry from those early days, allowing me to be in the third episode, you know, where I was still seen to be struggling and I was not, eminently unemployable I was, but she slotted me in because my mum was on that walkout too when she was a child. She left Scumra as a child, you know, and I played, I played the part of the bell ringer, the dobber that dobbed them in, and that, you know, for a bottle of Melbourne bitter. And we had a good talk there. We didn't see each other that much, and I kept my distance and that because I'm kind of too shamed, you know, that I was still, heavily addicted with my, drugs and things like this and that, you know, but I was allowed that small moment in time to be part of that. Because each and every of those actors, you know, we're cold from here, Bob Mazza, the Aboriginal wrangler, and, you know, he wrangled all the people like he did with Tommy Lewis's Jimmy Blacksmith. He also did this too. He got us all together and that. He was like that. He was, you know, a man that had many talents and that. And he and Justine, you know, with this particular production of the 3 episodes of Women of the Sun, you know, and you know that for me to have been included in that was big, and that I knew that that I had to pull up for that period of time to be up in country to do that, and we did it at Casterton. And I remember Malcolm Fraser allowed us to have his catering firm to cater for us on the set and that. And we had, cream mud cakes and all that for morning tea and that. We were well fed. But the mob from Melbourne and the mob from around the state of Victoria all came together to film that, you know, to be involved in this film. And it was a great get-together. And it could have gone on, you know, for me even better if I'd have... there were many moments like that where, you know, perhaps she was influential in just giving me that kind of look, that black look that women can give you, you know. And, she's you're ashamed of you. So I piss off and that, hide and that. But, yeah, she was a big influence in my life and the potential of what could have been if I'd have been taken more serious, myself more seriously, and my Indigenousness. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for my mum, but I will. But I think
It's okay, we won't tell anyone.
I'll text her later. But Mum would always speak really fondly of Uncle Bob and Auntie Jozzo a lot, and they definitely. So my mum, for those of you who don't know, my mum's an actor as well. Lillian Crombie, and so she was there. She was there in when the Black Theatre Black Theatre started in Redfern, and she was. She would tell me like fond memories of Auntie Jozzo
and Auntie Jozzo could work a room. I mean, I was a really shy producer when I first started. I was very shy, and she was like, "Okay, we're going to Screen Australia. We're going to the Australian Film Commission party tonight, and I want you to work the room to go and say hello to every single person. You're not allowed to have a drink until you say hello to everyone." And we had this policy of working the room and then she would go, okay, now party. And she was gone, and I wouldn't see her for the rest of the night, you know. But it was that thing of, like, that was the beauty of coming into the industry at that time when there weren't a lot of us that were filmmakers. There were a lot more actors. And being surrounded by people like, you know, Lillian was in our first short film Roundup, and just being able to sort of kind of be surrounded by these amazing men and women, especially the women, who just like said, whatever you need, my daughter, you know, you've got it. We're there for you, you know. And I think that allowed us to have a freedom, I suppose, in a lot of ways, when Sandra Celluloid came along and the Indigenous unit at Screen Australia, to dream big and to, you know, like to make the films that we really wanted to make in that way.
So it was really important and a critical point in time when we were starting to tell our own stories, and obviously Auntie Justine Saunders and Uncle Bob Mazda did that, and I have fond memories of Fringe Dwellers, because it was actually one of the first movies that I actually remember seeing as a kid and seeing black people on a screen. And there's only 2 times that that's happened for me, and that was one. And then seeing Yothu Yindi's Treaty for the first time, the music video. So those 2 are kind of memories that are kind of emblazoned in my mind for the first time I ever saw people that looked like me on television. So yeah, I would have loved to have met her and been able to have those sort of conversations. But next up, we have a clip of Auntie Justine Saunders in Women of the Sun, which Uncle Jack Charles was just talking about before. Yeah, you might be in it.
I have to explain, it's a cut-up of 2 parts of the scene, so I think you are in it.
Oh, look out, you'll have to look for yourself.
I don't have to tell you that the houses are full of cracks and the roofs are leaking. Kumala was a good place to live in, once. Now there's neglect everywhere. The cattle's sick and gives no milk, our kids are starving, and the people dying of TB. The government's got a policy they call apprentice training for young Aboriginal people. They say they'll train us so that we can become like them. What it means is that our kids are taken away and put into places as far as Queensland. What's the future in that?
Yeah, we don't want that. No.
We need training in agriculture, administration, and school teaching so that we can take more responsibility in Kumala and other places. There's no one else in this country treated in such a humiliating way. We need a permit to go on and off the mission. We need a permit to visit our relatives. We need a permit to see the doctor. Our endowments are controlled by the manager. He tells us where we must buy our rations. Instead of butter, we get rancid fat and the flour's full of weevils.
And if that's what they call protection, then we don't want it.
Wow.
So how did you feel after seeing that clip?
I want to see that too. Oh my God, I'm the worst. I am the
I'm
worst
pretty sure I
actor
saw someone's
today.
mum in that clip as well, Tony Briggs.
Hey?
Yeah, so how did you feel?
A lot of the Victorian blacks were in that one.
Yeah.
You know.
You probably recognised a
There's
few.
acknowledgement of the fact that every cast member had been related to the mob that was that did that walkout in Cumra and that, and that was filmed in St Mark's, the courtroom scene in Gore Street there, and that, you know, so it means a lot, you know, Gore Street or George Street, one of the 2, St Mark's, and that, but it was lovely going up to Casterton to the old sheep property, a tourist adventure up there at Casterton, and to turn it into the mission, and that, and she held court. She was the strong woman overseeing that project, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, her delivery is just spot on. So she's
And
so
that's
strong.
totally because of Helios Marius, right? So Tony's aunt, so one of the, you know, the family is one of the writers.
Yeah.
She worked with Sonia Bergman to write that series, and especially this one. You know, she took from the Cumbragunja walk-off and made it be, you know, and you can tell that it's a female voice writing for a female. Like, it's not sort of kind of, you know, everything that Annie Juzzy is saying there, you feel that that is something that any of our community women would have said around that time to rally up the troops, you know. And I think it's that truth that really started that relationship, you know, of really working in bipartisan or starting to work with Indigenous people being writers and directors at an early stage, really affected the way that we saw our scripts being spoken by these amazing actors that we have.
Yeah, and as you said, Annie Hillis-Maris was a writer on Women of the Sun, and you can, like you said, you could definitely hear her voice coming out in that. And we actually have a clip of her, talking about the story that was written about women of those times who had to take a leadership role at the time. So, yeah.
Women of the Sun. It was really good to write with Sonia Borg because Sonia, of course, is a very lovely person, very wonderful person to work with, and her understanding of the sort of thing that she'd like to have seen on film. And of course we had the story and the history of the people, and I just looked back and looked at what happened at Cumbragunja and what happened on the various mission stations where women had to take leadership roles in the various things that happened to them, whether it was Queensland or whether it was New South Wales, South Australia. Our women were becoming more and more outspoken politically. And so what I did, just put all those stories together, but it was mainly based on what happened at Cumbragunja, and it was because of that we were able to do such a good job in the writing of it.
So what do you think the legacy that is left behind from this show and Annie Hillis-Maris?
I suppose that's just, it's me, because you probably haven't seen any of the Women of the Sun. You got to watch the series, man. It's great. I think it's the start of a very big conversation about how important it is that we have our own voice on screen. And you know, the work that people like Annie Hillis and you know, Byron Siren and you know, Annie Lillian and a whole lot of, you know, it's sort of kind of really created a momentum in that 80s period for those of us that were being trained then by the Uncle Lesters and the Auntie Frida Glyns and the, you know, they started then making sure that there is a legacy. I mean, you look at the dynasty that is created from Annie Helios. You've got Tony Briggs, who did Sapphires. You know, you look at Annie Lillian and now Elaine. You know, like, you know, there are legacies and dynasties being created within this environment of film, which is often considered a privilege to be a part of, because it used to be so expensive, right? When we all started, we were still shooting on 35mm, you know. Nowadays it's a more accessible world, but back then it was a real privilege to be considered a part of a film industry. The one thing that I think for me that I would say is that people like Annie Helios and Frida Glynn and that and Uncle Lester and that made sure people were being trained. The next generation was being trained, so that then there was also not just the actors being on screen, but the behind the scenes people were starting to play, and that played a really important role in that 90s movement I mean, when you think about it, it's really sad that 88 was really the start of the Indigenous branch at ABC. ICAM at SBS was just about to start. You know, like it wasn't quite there yet. SBS was just about to start. So there was this movement in that sort of like, and then the 90s came and Screen Australia created the Indigenous unit. And that's only one generation of filmmakers, you know, making
that's
a
as long
part.
as I've actually existed in this world, which generally doesn't sound like a lot when you put it like that, yeah.
And when you think about it, people like, you know, I remember Wal Saunders when he first started at the as the manager of the Australian Film Commission. He used to say to all of us, we were at the film school at the time, and he came over and he said, do you know that there's 4,000 hours made on Indigenous peoples, and only 4 of those hours is produced by Aboriginal people? That was astonishing for a lot of us, as like, and the weight of all of us as filmmakers stepping into a world where he's just like went, scale it up, people. Yeah, we were just like, shit, you know. But I think that's what, and the one thing that we have learned is for every male voice, there has to be a female voice, because that's the Indigenous way.
Yep.
We have to make sure that both, you know, and it's interesting because, you know, I think in a lot of ways non-Indigenous filmmakers could learn from us about how to make sure that the voices go up together. You know, for every male director that we have in this country that is Indigenous, there is an Indigenous female director. For every male writer, there is an Indigenous woman writer. Producers, there's more women because we're just better at it. But you know what I mean? Like that's just a reality, and you can see that there is a momentum now in that day and age. Yeah.
And do you think that Women of the Sun also allowed women to have more leading roles?
Yeah, and the great thing was that was the first time a female had been paid and credited properly. Bob Weiss had funded both. Up until Annie Hillier started working as a writer, most of the Indigenous consultants were often actors, female actors, that wrote their own scripts saying, I would never say that, or, and the same with the men. They'd all question that sort of thing. This was one of the first times that a woman had been credited and paid to be a writer on a story. And that's 83, that's really sad that it's not that far ago.
Yeah. No, not at all. So next up, guys, we have a clip of Essie Coffey in My Life as an Aboriginal.
Aboriginal culture, it should be taught in all schools to Aboriginal kids. They're completely forgetting about their own tribe, their culture and their tradition. And that is most important, that you kids just remember what you are, that you stand tall and you stand proud on your own land, what you're standing now. And that's black land, Aboriginal land.
So Pauline, for those...
Sorry, I don't want it to be about it.
So
it's
for
just
those...
the historian out of the group. True. Other than Uncle Jack.
Yeah, I'm sure Uncle Jack's got a few things to say about Essie Coffey as well. But for those who don't know, who is or was Essie Coffey, and why is she so important to the trailblazing landscape on our screens that's left by Aboriginal women?
So Essie Coffey was a filmmaker. She came from Breorina. She worked with Martha and Sarah. The two of them were a tag team, and they just made stories predominantly about herself and about the world that she lived in. And she would put the camera on herself, and people and this was the point when, you've got to remember the time too, that this is when Indigenous Australia was now getting the rights to own their own media organisations. So out of the movement came radio stations. The BRACs was formed, the remote Indigenous media organisations that were places like Karma and Galari and Amiwari Media, and she came out of the Burke radio station originally, so she was a translator and a wild one that used to do, I think it was Prison Hour, to the boys back in the prison system. She'd do the songs and she'd bring in a guitar and play the songs. And when film came around, she decided that she needed to tell the stories of her people. And people like her and Auntie Frida Glynn and, out of Karma, you can pocket them around the country, Dot West over in WA. And there were just this movement of trailblazer men and women in Australia that just went, well, now we have ABC at access point to us, and now we have SBS, and let's party, sort of kind of thing. And they went out and made stories predominantly about themselves, which just enriched Australia, because no one had really seen our world in real life, they sort of kind of were the first reality TV, and opened a world that people just had never seen before. Auntie Essie was so important because she also showed all the holes and bars. There's a scene in, if you get to see My Life as an Aboriginal, there's this beautiful scene where she stands outside the pub and she has an argument with her cousin and she's like, is there a better place for us to be? And you just and he's getting thrown into the cop, into a cop car at the back, a paddy wagon, and she turns to the copper and she calls him out with the camera still rolling, and I just think people like her were brave to show all the issues that were happening in our communities.
And all the realities, yeah. And it was good, like you said, the whole idea of seeing Aboriginal life from our perspective as opposed to a documentary style of someone coming in and saying, so it's good that was starting to happen, especially with Essie Coffee. We have lots of clips here tonight for you. So here is a clip of Tracy Morfett's work, Bedevil.
Free fall into an uncharted journey.
Shh, shh, shh. They hear it, but they can't see it.
When we lived out here, strange things would happen. She's here! She's here! A little blind girl. She was killed on the track. Get tangled in a web of dreams.
Why is Imelda always sad?
Imelda had a son. He was her only child. She was never the same after he died. Bedevil. The best films break new ground.
That's lovely.
So Tracy Morfett is an internationally renowned, respected creative, yet she doesn't seem to have reached the same level of recognition as maybe a male counterpart. So let's maybe think of someone like Warwick Thornton, for example. Do you think this is purely because she's a woman? Is this true, and do you agree? Panel.
She opened the Biennale in Venice this year. She's one of the... the greatest thing about her is she wouldn't conform. Her art's out there. I don't know if anyone's seen her latest work, but it's looking at all of the characters that are mamas or have been nannies through Black America movies as well as Australian, and sort of kind of pre-posing and putting herself into those movies. It's weird and it's wonderful, and you need people like that. I think we forget in Australia, we still think that we have to conform to a 3-act structure of storytelling, and we as Indigenous artists don't. Sometimes we dance, sometimes we sing, sometimes we paint, sometimes we put film on, sometimes we're a potter. So, you know, like sometimes we act, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry. The different messages are all the same. And so that's what I love about someone like Tracy Moffat as a trailblazer. And I don't know if she gets enough credit for it.
No, she doesn't.
The fact
She
that
never has.
she is a filmmaker who did the In Excess music clip and went for world famous, right? She did My Island Home for Christina Noon, you know, like she did clips. And then she made films. And then she went and made a whole lot of money as a photographer. You know, like she didn't want to conform. And I think the reason why I put her in is because I think she's a trailblazer that we all forget about. And I think that she's important in telling the story that is not non-linear in terms of storytelling, that we have to sometimes be brave. Both that and Night Cries were studio-based phenomenal works at a time when, like, people weren't ready for experimental in Australia. I don't know if Australia is actually still ready for experimental works yet, you know?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that either.
Yeah, but internationally she's recognised.
They're more interested overseas, aren't they, in
Yeah.
our stories and you know, especially her film, Bedevilled, and that one in particular.
Yeah.
It hit, you know, it went well overseas.
Yeah.
Here, you know, I think that a lot of people, Australians, were, you know, totally floored over the fact that an Aboriginal woman has done this film, and Bedevilled. And that I loved working with her, and that I had a little cameo spot on that one. And we did it in Long Bay Jail, and she was so easy to get along with, and that I truly wasn't really in my element, because in those days I was still performing with this silly addiction of mine, you know, powders and etc. But nonetheless, the system allowed me to run, and that, you know, we're not like that nowadays. The system now, especially women in the business now, they're very strong, the women in the business, about risk assessments. And I tell people who are dabbling and that, beware, we have risk assessments. And you can't be seen to be, you know, being, because if you have an addiction and you're a performer, you're totally absorbed in yourself. You're not part of the real scene, the family of the cast, you know. Cast member is a family member of the cast. You're an individual, you're up yourself, you only have yourself, your own self-interest and that. And sometimes you won't turn up because maybe the dealer hasn't come. And that. So the point of fact is old people like myself and, you know, others, you know, we have an obligation of teaching the next generation, going into our Whopper, QPAC, VCA, and giving a heads up to the young and, you know, aspiring performers and filmmakers and etc., television series makers and that beware. You know, we're not like the old days. You can't have a slab, you know, a half a dozen slabs of beer in your caravan on the set anymore. We don't allow it.
But also teaching people about people like Tracy Moffat and, you know, Uncle Lester, teaching all of our next generation and, like, in a putting weight in that and knowing that without them they wouldn't have what, you know, what we have. We wouldn't have what we have now if it wasn't for, and being really proud about knowing that as well. Sometimes people don't know where they come from or where they're stepping or who stepped before them, you know.
And often they were doing stuff really brave without places like the Indigenous units that we now have, or NITV or whatever. They were forging a pathway that sort of kind of allowed a lot of us to walk behind. But then this next generation now, like, I look at them and I go, you know, you should be able to experiment. Like, you should see what was done back in the, you know, in the 80s and the 90s. And because there were some amazing works that were being created by some of these amazing women that often we don't get enough time to celebrate and talk about.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing we have tonight to do that. And at the start of tonight, at the start of the talk, I spoke about, of course, the 20-year anniversary of Radiance. And next up, we do have a clip from Radiance, directed by Rachel Perkins.
Yeah, it's my favourite scene.
Hey, do they still have listings of what's on? Like rodeos? Kind of hoping there was a rodeo in town. My dad could be in town. Maybe he heard about Mum's death.
Turn it off. Hate country and western.
She's not going to turn up, is she? She looks drop-dead gorgeous. Not like some people. She's got the best voice. Chrissy! I knew you'd come.
Wow. So this is the story of 4 incredibly talented Aboriginal women telling this story penned by a white man. Do you think that only women can tell women's stories and only black women can tell their own stories?
You got to argue whether or not it was penned by him, though, right? So the history of Radiance is Annie Justine, Rhoda Roberts and Lydia went to Louis Nara and said, we think we should do this story about blah. And could it have been penned by them as well? Whether or not they got given the credit is the issue, right? They went on to 2 of them, Lydia was Rachel. Rachel was Trisha's role, and Rhoda was Deb Malman's role in the theatre play originally, way back
I didn't know that.
And then this became the feature. So I don't know whether or not you could claim that Louis Nara had written all of it. I think there was influence in a very big way from those women. He actually happened to be dating one of them at the time. So I'd imagine there would have been a bit of conversations about that script at that time.
And Elaine, how important do you think it is?
Controversial, but let's go there. I might get in trouble off Louis, but hey.
It's okay, we won't tell anyone.
It's all right.
How important do you think it is that black women tell their own stories?
I think it's really important. I don't think there's any argument against it. Like, you can't. There's just no. In my mind, in my own personal view, there is no space for a white writer to write any kind of black story without paying full due credit to the black creative. That sounds really. That sounds arse up. But what it is, like, just don't do it. Just don't do it. Don't even entertain the idea. Just get out. No. I just can't. Yeah, that's where I stand firmly, you know, because that's where the money is in writing, or, you know, you talk about theatre plays. That's where the money comes. You know, a play gets picked up again for another life. That royalty money and it, you know what I mean. Like, if it's not paid in the right way, then white fellas are getting paid off of the backs of blacks again, and it's just not. There's no space. There's no space in my world for that. I'm very vocal about that, as we've just seen. Yeah, that's yeah. It's
and
like,
of course,
yeah, if you're gonna get out, like just get out. If you're gonna, we ain't got time to talk about that. We've got other stuff to talk about.
Yeah. And you know, I'm pretty honoured that once the edited version of Bastardy was seen on the screened on the ABC late that night, there were 2 telephone calls to me at my unit on my landline, one from Rachel Perkins and one from Rachel Mazza. And they wanted to do Bastardy the stage show. And that's how they put it. Want to do Bastardy the stage show, Jack? It's a good documentary. So I had to choose Rachel because her father and I, we kicked off the modern black theatre movement here in Melbourne, and Sydney and all that kind of stuff. So inevitably, and engaged John Rommel, who wrote the original play Bastardy for the Prayer Factory in 1970. And it was a hoot. It was a four-hander. It was based loosely on my alcoholic memory of meeting my mum for the first time. But Rachel, she directed me in this my first performance post-addiction. I was off to methadone. I'd finished my jail time. I was undertaking the leading role ever of wearing the mantle of my responsibility of being the leading black light in my community. The mantle of the Featherfoot. I called myself the Featherfoot, the Kadicha man in Collingwood, Fitzroy, and that Smith Street, and that. And she, if it wasn't for her, you know, the documentary Bastardy wouldn't have. There needed to be something else to Bastardy, the doco. It tweaked the Australian conscience, and etc. It did that, but the follow through a year later with Bastardy, my first post-addiction performance at the Fairfax studio, where she convinced me that I should be wired in for sound because it was the first time I was performing a main production on a main stage, and I needed to be seen as being taken seriously and with gravitas in the telling of my story in the stage show with 3 band members on the side. And from that moment on, it travelled well. It's gone right round Australia. So it was due to her, Rachel Mazza, that I believe I got for pushing and getting a lot of support for Jack Charles's Up and Fighting, the stage show. And, again, it put me in the, as a leading black light in the Melbourne scenario of, a person that's come from, a miserable life of crime and, serial pest nuisance of Melbourne, becoming a leading black light in the arts, and etc., telling my story and that. And so Bastardy did well, but it did even better when I did Jack Charles versus the Crown. It was all because of Rachel pushing that. But both the Rachels wanted to run with it. And in fact, fantastic that, Rachel was in town, so immediately latched and, Rumrell, I told more stories of being raised up in the blood of the Lamb of Jesus fucking Christ at the at the Box Hill Boys Home and all that kind of stuff. And then I wrote the wet dreaming of mine unfulfilled to have my criminal record expunged. Whereas she said, the audience become the High Court of Australia, Jack, you know. So we've travelled well with that. And this year, early in June, we did Japan. One performance in Japan, and the set broke up. We'd just done Auckland Arts Festival and then Japan. And so it was timely. After all these years, we've put JC on a coat hanger, and he's hanging in a cupboard now. We've retired JC for a while, you know, which is fantastic. And she's gone on, you know, she's over in Whopper now, keeping an eye on her son. In Whopper and performing, doing some directing over there. And that people like her need to be travelling around the country.
Yeah.
We need to be going from, Whopper, QPAC, you know, VCA, and that. I often get called over to VCA to give a bit of a hum up to the students and all that kind of stuff, a heads up. And it's been just wonderful that a Melburnian like myself is still being taken seriously. Well, I was taken very seriously, especially after Bastardy came along and Jack Charles versus the Crown, you know, boosted up my reserves. Yeah.
And that's the power of the new Trailblazers that came out of the acting fraternity and moved into directing and people like Rachel Mazza, who then took on Neil Bidgery and made it a strong force. Leah Purcell stepping into behind the scenes and directing, and you know, just finished Wentworth and a couple of other, you know, amazing director. You know, this body of passionate. We miss them on screen, actually.
True.
You know, of passionate actors that then stepped up and went behind the scenes and are now creating the pathway in television, in drama, in a very, I mean, you know, I'd love to see Elaine direct something. I think she is close, possibly.
Close.
Oh, you're ready. You're ready.
You know, because they've been on set more than a lot of us. I mean, I'm lucky. As a producer, I've made myself be really busy. But, you know, I think sometimes it's a long drink if you're just writing and then directing something. It's sometimes can take 7 years to write and then direct a film. And that's the formula that Australia has. But as actors, they're on set for in between that 7 years, right? So they're getting more experience on set than a lot of us that are trained as filmmakers as well. So it's that thing of trying to find that balance of the new wave and the old sort of merging together is going to hopefully be a really exciting space for Australia.
And there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room now. You know, there's so much room for people to just come and step into things like directing, and you know, there wouldn't have been much space before. But you got people like, you know, but talking about someone like Leah Purcell, she's written a book. You know, she's acting, directing theatre, directing film, writing screenplays. Like, it's just, the list is. She just constantly renews herself, and we're lucky as young fellas that she's our role model. You know, that she's one for these young fellas for all of us that are coming up. You know, yeah.
Uncle Jack, did you want to say something? Huh? Did you want to say something, or did you lose it just then?
Well, you know, it's the women that have taken sides with me. You know, they must feel some soft spot for me. Maybe they want to mother me, but Rachel Perkins has often slotted me in something, and that, you know, because she just likes, you know, she knows I'm eminently directable, you know, and you know, I'll do anything a woman says on the set and that, you know. I fear for a retribution. But look, it's a pleasure to be working with them. Suddenly, somebody doesn't turn up on the set, you know, outside Sydney at some property where they're filming. Kelton Pell suggested, "Oh, Jack Charles is alive. He's still living in Melbourne." So they flew me up that afternoon to do the shoot, late that afternoon, and that's Rachel Perkins, mate, you know. So, you know, I really, you know, my heart goes out because the women have been, you know, at the forefront pushing us. It was the women in all our communities that, you know, invariably got, who were educated, who got their kids to go to school and kept their marks up and etc. And writing petitions here in Corranderk, it was the women that collected all those signatures and the petitions which William Barak and my great-great-grandfather had walked in from Corranderk into Parliament and that. So it was the women that was doing that. So even in a, you know, on a mission, the women were very powerful, keeping the culture alive. The men, their balls had been cut in some fashion and that. So it was the women that were the backbone of the men that were holding forth. In those days, people didn't listen to women, so they kind of educated the men. William Barak, you're the leader, and that's you say the right thing, William. Go in there. We women will follow you into Parliament, and that's so. That's how it has been in those days, in those late 1700s, early 1800s.
Yeah, well, just in relation to that, you can see how that power in that space in the 1800s and, you know, doing everything that happened, and how you said that women were the backbone and were resilient and the stalwarts, and how that has kind of portrayed itself in this space again with women wanting to direct and write and tell their own stories, and that's kind of the essence that's left behind from what's happened, I think. And yeah, so that's what I was just thinking.
That the white history is very much his story, right?
Yeah.
And so Australia has very much a male story. And so even in terms of press, the way that the press will do more about a Warwick Thornton film than they will about a Rachel Perkins film.
Right, yeah.
And that's something that, you know, I think Australia needs to get a little bit over. Get over the penal colony and too many males here. There were females here, actually. They were just Aboriginal, and that's why I think half of Australia has a black history. But anyway, we won't go there. But, you know, like, we were founded on a lot of our women's stories. And our culture was kept alive not just by men, but by women of this country. And when our voices were allowed to be finally told, both of us got to raise up. It's just that white Australia hasn't caught up yet and sort of kind of been able to educate themselves to empower women. We're 50% of the population. Get over it, people. Let's get real about that part of it so that we can actually hear everyone's voice. Everyone has value. You know, I think that's the importance of people like Bedevil and stuff. You know, it wasn't just that that was an Aboriginal film, but it was actually one of the most multicultural films I'd seen of that era. You know, it had Asians and a whole lot, you know, like, and a lot of our Indigenous films are the mishmash that is society, not this sort of whitewash of what Australia sort of neighbours sort of kind of street looks like, you know. It shows the truth of what Australia looks like, you know. And I think that's the world that we need to open everyone's mind up to in a lot of ways, you know.
Feature films directed by Aboriginal women on this slide.
Yeah, so I just thought it'd be interesting to show you how many there have been, because there have been a few. Predominantly done by Rachel Perkins.
Brand New Day, yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think I've seen all but one. Yes.
Yeah.
So with every male-directed film, there is a film directed by a female, and that's something that Pauline has spoken about before. Yet we only ever hear of the great success of the male counterparts. Yet the ratio is fairly balanced, like you said, 50-50. And I know you kind of spoke about it before, but can you...
Indigenous cultures. I mean, I think that's the thing. I work for Imaginative. I'm a programmer for Imaginative, which is the largest world Indigenous film festival, which happens in Toronto next week. And I program for them. I've programmed for them for a couple of years. And, you know, we watch 587 films a year to put in 120 of them. And we don't even look at what's a good story. And at the end, it's always around a 50-50 hit of women directors versus male directors, right? The same with Window, the film festival that I hold here in Australia in November, late November in Sydney. It's predominantly 50-50. Like, you can't, like, and it's because when you raise up a voice, both sides of the voice of a community need to be heard. And so we always try to make, and it's also the power of, there's a lot of women that make the decisions. We have people like Sally Riley, who's in ABC, and Penny Smollercombs at Screen Australia Indigenous branch. There's a lot of women that are in the roles of decision-making for funding our films and TV. And so it allows the balance to still be there in that way, I think. We're not sort of we're a little bit different to the rest of the country in that regard, which I think is really refreshing.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you guys for that awesome conversation. We're going to open it up to the floor, and if anyone's got any questions that they would like to ask our panel, please ask away. And don't be shy.
Thanks. Look, the clips were fantastic. My first impression was that very first one, Jeddah, misappropriation of myth. And, you know, one of the things about film, and I'm not a filmmaker, but it's the great myth makers, you know, the great storytellers. And I just want to know, you've talked a lot about the progression, so what about the future? So what's the...
We were talking about Trailblazers tonight. I don't know.
The next Trailblazer.
I think we're in a really interesting time. There's some amazing new. I actually don't even call them. See, I don't even call myself a filmmaker anymore. I call myself a storyteller because I've just finished an installation piece because I wanted to tell a story about. With Larissa Brent, the two of us worked on a project together about deaths in custody, and I didn't want it to be a documentary, and how do you voice that story? And so we created a prison cell and did video, and Elaine was in it, and we did, you know, paper mache of toilets and stuff, made a cell block, and then sort of reimagined stuff within that space, made a possum cloak and stuff. And it's that thing of like, that's the joy of the new technology that's opening up to us. Some of our young ones and the world that they think in, I mean, it's so great. It's so non-linear, and it makes you really excited to see what that new space is, you know. There's some really exciting new young filmmakers that have predominantly been artists up until now. And I'm excited to see what they do in the next couple of years.
Kate Beckett, for instance, hey?
Kate's beautiful.
Where's she going to go?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You know, B. Cruz is another young, up-and-coming sort of artist, filmmaker meets multi-sensory. I don't know what you call her, but it's exciting. Like, it's really exciting, the new world of storytelling that's on our... And then there's kids like Elaine's kids' generation that are just doing it on Facebook. The fact that their sensibilities are opening up in such a different way. We're moving so fast in technology that sometimes I think we should just need to slow down and look at what the Trailblazers have done and be brave enough to go back there a bit and sort of like go, where can we learn from that technique? Because I hear a lot at the moment that we're the first. We're the first that did comedy. We're the first that... And I'm like, really? I know someone that did it in 1955.
Yeah.
But, you know, like... And I think it's because, for me, I'm a filmmaker that's also passionate about research. That I think that we still have to have that element of really looking in and back to ourselves, especially when it comes to our culture. We have to think about... how do we place it in the new world that is open to everything? And some of these young ones are really thinking about that stuff, and that's exciting for me.
Yeah, like my son, I recently bought a camera that you can film on, and I gave it to him the other night when we come in here for Tanderrum, and he was just engaged.
Wow.
Like he
totally.
wasn't. He's not been engaged in anything the whole time he's visited me. He's just been on Fortnite, but he had this camera and was just filming. It was amazing. Like I always kind of know that he's, you know, that's an investment, to invest in that, to just say go and do what you got to do. Here's a camera, go and point it at something, take photos, take film, tell your story, because your story is worth being told.
And it's also that they have freedom of thought, right? You think about this generation of her son and a whole lot of our next generation haven't been grown up with the stereotype that we grew up in of this is what women only do this, and black men are like this, and you know, like black men can only learn about their culture from a white guy that saves him and teaches him his culture. I mean, you know, like that's Dead Hard Australia. You know, you can pick the film made by a white person, and that's the story of the contemporary black male, you know. But that's sort of that's where we're at, is that these kids didn't grow up with those stereotypes. We did, and now they have freedom of thought, and they can go anywhere. Like, you know, when you have that freedom not to be oppressed in your mind with that racism, there's still racism, but not to the same level that we had it when we were growing up. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I thought I saw another hand up somewhere before.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing all your deadly yarns and going in. I'm a proud Torres Strait Islander Merriam-Mer woman, and I too have been in the industry for quite some time as an actor. And I guess my question is just, I feel like as Indigenous artists, we're doing so much heavy lifting. You know, we're not just actors and artists and dancers and storytellers, but we're also politicians and activists and educators, and we're doing all these roles that Parliament and education system should be doing. And I feel like my question is just, how do you deal day to day with that emotional labour that we have to go through, and that, you know, we can't choose that, you know, as Indigenous artists. We're just born with that, I guess, responsibility. So, yeah, I guess how do you deal with that? Is it just the company keep, or you feel slack, or what?
Well, I'm currently in a rehearsal room, and with my brother there, Tony, up the back.
Is that Astro Man?
That is Astro Man at Melbourne Theatre Company. Shameless plug. But there was a day where we spent an hour talking about just us and our culture and storytelling and family structure, like just this constant education. And as I was talking about it and in it, telling it, I then said to the director, I was like, and we've spent an hour now. I've spent an hour being a cultural consultant on this. Like, we've spent an hour. I'm tired now. I just had to. I mean, but I've been here in this realm. Like, I've watched Mum Mob grow up. I've watched, you know, Big Sister Pauline, Uncle Jack, and I'm getting to that point now where I'm tired, but I'll just say it. You know, and yeah, it really is about I think it is the company you keep, you know, especially, but you know, as artists, we're kind of, there is a space, we do have a space where we are protected and we can express ourselves and all that kind of stuff, but for someone who is not an artist, who is out there, like, I'm thankful that I sit where I sit, you know, for those brothers and sisters that are out in the coalface every day, having to deal with, you know, all the issues that you've said, like, you know, more power to them. I'm right because I can express myself and push a new blood through me and my expression of my spirit. But some fellas that are just out there day to day, like it's, yeah. That's that from me.
I'm a little bit of a workaholic, as most people that do know me. And I also have a legacy of a family like Tony that walked a path of being a part of the movement. And I understand the reality of our community. I think I do what I do because I see the amount of suicide in our community. I see those young kids and it makes me angry. And I have to do it. And I'm now working at UTS as an associate professor, best title ever, of the Cultural Resilience Research Group, which I just think just means me saying no to a lot of white people and yes to a lot of black people, which is great. I've always wanted to be in that space. But I have to take time out from the big stuff. So I've worked at, I helped create Message Stick at ABC way back when. And I seem to do big stuff for really impactful 3 or 4 years. So I did Message Stick and then, and then I moved across to Channel 7 and did some stuff there, and then NITV was a big shift, changing the voice of that when it moved to SBS. But I love mentoring young ones. I do a lot of that. It gives me a lot of joy. I got 3 young ones at the moment. They're all 19 and they keep me on my toes. We were shooting a music clip on the weekend because they just wanted to learn how to do music clips. I love that sort of kind of stuff. I spend most of my weekends, other than the weekends when either Lainey or other people, but I have my 2 oldest filmmaker friends, Ado and Jill, and we sit around and debrief the week. Usually, and most people know that of us. A nice morning brunch. And that's that, and going overseas to see other like-minded. This is the thing that I learnt a very long time ago. People always say to us, but your niche is so small, you're a minority. And I go, really, are we? Because when I look at the world's Indigenous population, it is 370 million. I can work with that. And so I think international a lot. I like to think of big picture movements, especially with the amazing women that have been mentors to me internationally in film. Merete Mitu was a great mentor, and we miss her dearly. Her film hopefully will come to Australia next year. And Alanisa Bomswan, who at the age of 85 just finished her 51st documentary last week. And I see her next week in Canada, and having mentors like that, I hope that when I'm 85 I have the same gusto and same passion that I have now. I love my craft. I love what I do. I wouldn't have it any other way. I love seeing, I've been a part of people's journeys and lives and seen the good and the bad, but a lot of good, and we're lucky. Like Lainey was saying, we're not at the coalface of some of our communities, but we can be a voice that makes them aspire to be something better and to change, and I hope my little bit can help.
Also the stuff that, the clip that you do on Facebook with your friend, like that kind of stuff that's awesome. I haven't got that kind of stuff out there, but that's definitely something that, and look at the cast that you had, like that cast was so diverse, it was amazing. All different shades of brown, and it's out there and it's on social media. All the kids, all the young ones are on social media and they're watching that kind of stuff, and that's amazing, Layla. It's definitely keep doing that. I'd love to see more of that. Like, I love that kind of, that stuff, you know.
There is another one coming.
Excellent, yes!
It's in post-production.
And can I be in one? But, you know, that's the stuff as well, because, like we've said, like, things are changing. Where is it all at? It's all online. It's all on social media for stuff that we don't have control over. Like, it's going to change, and you are definitely a part of that. You are in that. You know, keep going, sis.
Thank you.
Any more questions before we wrap it up?
I just thought I'd show some photos of some amazing women on set. The other film to watch out for is Annie Frida Glynn. Is her daughter Erica Glynn is making a documentary about her life.
Oh, yeah.
Coming out hopefully in the next. Grace beside me is the crew down there. Leah, obviously. Katrina, Miranda at Top End Wedding, looking stunned behind the camera, and Rachel way back when in Radiance, because I thought for the same reason it's the 20th anniversary of that. And look how young she looks.
Was that Katrina up the top?
Up the
corner?
top with Gulp. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's one to watch out for. With a whole lot of actors being behind the scenes, which is great. You're in that one, aren't you, Lady?
Yeah. I'm in that.
Well, that has been a wonderful conversation. A big round of applause for all our panel, everyone, Pauline, Elaine and Uncle Jack Charles. Thank you again for your stories and coming and having this discussion with us. And I hope that this discussion has made you start thinking and your brain ticking about your perception of trailblazing women and just women in film and behind camera, and especially women of colour and Indigenous women. And hopefully it starts discussions in your house and in your life and in your world. So thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Layla Gurawiwi, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you to you too, sis, for hosting tonight. You're deadly.